हेलो फ्रेंड्स, वेलकम टू माय चैनल इंग्लिश विद छगन अरोड़ा। फ्रेंड्स, आज मैं आप लोगों के लिए प्राइड एंड प्रेजुडिस पे कुछ क्वेश्चंस लेके आया हूँ। आई होप these 25 MCQs will help you in your future exam. My first question for you is: the novel Pride and Prejudice begins with the following statement. It is a trustworthy, universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife, B, a house in the country, C, a good education, D, nothing, and answer is a wife. This question was also asked in UGC NET. This opening statement, it is a trustworthy, truth universally acknowledged, hints at events that will be important in the novel. The literary term for such a statement is A, plot, B, understatement, C, foreshadowing, D, theme, and answer is foreshadowing. The gentleman who has moved into Netherfield, thereby causing great excitement for Mrs. Bennet, is A. Mr. Darcy, B. Mr. Long, C. Mr. Bingley, D. Mr. Bennet, and answer is C. Mr. Bingley. At the ball, where the girls meet the new gentleman in Hertfordshire, Mr. Darcy insults Elizabeth when A refuses to ask her to dance. B. He knocks her over while dancing with Jane. C. He tells her that her musical ability is terrible. D. He flirts with her without being properly introduced. The answer is A. Elizabeth and her sister Jane are close and are alike in many ways, but A. Elizabeth is more kindly in her judgment of people than Jane is. B. Elizabeth is more shrewd in her judgment of people than Jane is. C. The sisters compete with each other when it comes to winning men's affections. D. Jane is closer to her friend Charlotte than she is to Elizabeth, and answer is B. Mrs. Bennet insists on Jane riding to Netherfield on horseback rather than in a carriage because A. She wants to town people to see what an accomplished horsewoman Jane is. B. She wants to take the carriage into town herself. C. She thinks it will rain. D. She is ashamed that their carriage will be thought of as shabby. And answering C, she thinks it will rain. When Elizabeth travels to Netherfield to tend to her sister, A. Miss Bingley and Mrs. Hurst make her feel at home. B. Mr. Darcy speaks to her about his growing affection to her. C. She finds Mr. Bingley to be very concerned for Jane's welfare. D. She becomes worried that Jane is faking her illness to remain at Netherfield. And answer is C. Miss Bingley often needles Mr. Darcy about his comment that Elizabeth is a very poor dancer. B. Would make a good wife. C. Has fine eyes. D. Is the most accomplished woman in Hertfordshire. And answer is C. In her conversation with Darcy, Elizabeth A. refers to him and says what she thinks he would like to hear. We see every opportunity to flatter him. She speaks her mind even if it defies him. D tries to hide how much she has grown to love him and answer is C. Of all his daughters, Mr. Bennet A. most enjoys Lydia and Kitty for their liveliness and sense of fun. B most enjoys Mary for her studiousness. C most enjoys Elizabeth for her sensibleness and wit. D most enjoys Jane for her kindness and warmth. And answering C. The Bennet are surprised by a visit from Mr. Collins, who A is going to inherit Longbourn. B is Mrs. Bennet's long lost cousin. C once asked for Jane's hand in marriage. D is down on his luck. And answer is A. Mr. Bennet and Elizabeth agreed that Mr. Collins is quite a good match for Jane, be absurd and ridiculous, C worthy of receiving a loan, D probably giving to squander the money Mr. Bennet gives him, and answer is B. Mr. Collins' reason for travelling to Longbourn is A to obtain a loan, B to find a wife, C to buy new furniture for the house, D to reacquaint himself with Mrs. Bennet, and answer is B. Mr. Wickham reveals to Elizabeth that A. Mr. Darcy had tried to elope with Mrs. Wickham's sister. B. Mr. Darcy had killed a man in a duel. C. Mr. Darcy had been raised to become a clergyman but had refused. D. Mr. Darcy had kept him from receiving his rightful inheritance. And answer is D. Miss Lady Catherine de Bourgh is Darcy's mother's sister, and according to Wickham A, her daughter is going to marry Mr. Darcy, her daughter is going to marry Mr. Wickham, her daughter is going to marry Mr. Collins, her daughter is going to marry Mr. Bingley, and answer is A. At the Netherfield ball, a fight between Mr. Wickham and Mr. Darcy is narrowly prevented. B. Jane is upset that Mr. Bingley does not attend. C. Elizabeth is disappointed to dance the first two dances with Mr. Collins. D. Everyone notices that the attention Mr. Wickham pays to Lydia, and answer is C. Both Mr. Bingley and her sister Caroline prefer Netherfield to London. We deny Wickham's story of how Darcy treated him badly. She agreed that Elizabeth would be a good match for Mr. Darcy. We believe that Jane would be a good match for Mr. Bingley, and answer is B. Mrs. Bennet is angry with Elizabeth when she A dances with Mr. Wickham, B refuses a marriage proposal, she goes walking with Mr. Darcy, dances with Mr. Bingley, and answer is B. Caroline Bingley sends a letter that Mr. Bingley has gone to London, and Elizabeth realizes that Miss Bingley wants to keep the Bennets away from her brother. B. Mr. Bingley really does not have feeling for Jane. C. The family should send Jane to London to be with Mr. Bingley. D. Mr. Bingley really loved another woman, and answer is A. Charlotte accepts a marriage proposal from Mr. Collins primarily because A. She wants to live in Derbyshire where his home is. B. She wishes to move away from her family. C. She wants to be married. And D. She is recently widowed and needs someone to help raise her children. And answer is C. Following Charlotte's engagement to Mr. Collins, her friendship with Elizabeth cools because A. Charlotte's mother tells Charlotte that Elizabeth is jealous. B. Married women were expected to be close friends only with other married women. C. Elizabeth is disappointed in her friend. D. Mr. Collins asked Charlotte not to be friends with Elizabeth, and answer is C. At the end of volume first, the Bennet are preparing to travel to London for the winter. The Bingleys and Mr. Darcy return to Hertfordshire. C. Elizabeth receives a letter from Mr. Darcy. D. Mrs. Bennet is distraught over Charlotte Lucas's impending marriage. Mrs. Bennet can be best as described as A. Loving, B. Perceptive, C. Disloyal, and answer is D. Scheming. When Mr. Bennet says an unhappy alternative is before you, Elizabeth, from this day you must be a stranger to one of your parents. Your mother will never see you again if you don't marry Mr. Collins, and I will never see you again if you do. Example. This is an example of A. Irony, Bingley, C. Foreshadowing, and D. Subplot, and answer is A. Charlotte's expectations of her life with Mr. Collins are that A. He will make her happiest of women. His wealth will compensate for their lack of love. She has as much chance of happiness with him as with anybody. D. He will make a much better husband than her mother predicts. And answer is C. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Wish you best of luck for your exam.